Today, Open Source Security is talking to Kat Cosgrove, the head of developer advocacy at Minimus and a member of the Kubernetes steering committee. Kat wrote a blog post recently, and so I asked them to come on. And I'm just going to read the title quick, and then I'll take it from here. It's When Projects Fail, Why Companies Should Treat Open Source as Infrastructure. So, Kat, welcome to the show. I'm very excited. Take it away.
Super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. This is one of my favorite things to get on a soapbox about. But the general gist of it is that for a long time, not like maintaining upstream open source software was considered something that you did largely for like the brownie points,
Yeah.
to feel like morally good about giving back to this tool that you probably make money off of, right? It's part of your paid product that you make money off of. And so you support it either with maintainers or with money, for the brownie points. But that is no longer like the only reason to do this. Now, not maintaining things that you rely on is a pretty significant security risk. Um, the most dramatic example of this is the shutdown of Ingress NGINX, which is a piece of Kubernetes that was in close to 50% of cloud native environments. That's pretty significant
Yeah.
considering how widely used Kubernetes is. And we had to shut it down I feel like we gave pretty good runway on this. There was like 2 years of maintainers begging for help, and then we gave 6 months notice of the shutdown because it became an unmaintainable security nightmare.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was not possible for us to keep up with the CVE reports ongoing. It was being maintained by only two people who were not being paid to do that full time. They were working in their spare time to maintain something that, again, 50% of cloud native environments were relying on. And because of the fundamental way in which Ingress NGINX works, it is, as Tabitha Sable, a member of the Security Response Committee, said, a never-ending CVE pinata.
Yeah.
It just like constant. It's not possible to keep up with it. And because we've had to shut it down, anybody who didn't pay attention and didn't actively choose to migrate off of it onto Gateway API or like literally anything else is now at risk because it's going to keep working.
Yes.
Like the last build of it works, but we can't guarantee that it'll stay CVE free forever.
Oh,
I would bet
I
money
guarantee
that
there's a bunch
somebody.
of them now.
Oh yeah, I would bet money that somebody is sitting on a nasty RCE and just waiting for a good opportunity to drop it, and everybody who didn't switch is vulnerable, and that was an entirely avoidable situation. If those that 50% of people of companies had bothered to help maintain it, we would not be here, and
Yeah.
that problem is only going to get worse.
Okay. And so here's the real reason I wanted you on is kind of, I feel like there's an intersection of questions that we can use this as kind of the jumping point off of. So first of all, you're part of the Kubernetes universe, and that's part of the CNCF, which is a
Hmm.
behemoth foundation. And so you've got
Yep.
people that are like, why didn't the CNCF just start paying people to take care of this? So there's that angle, right? And then there's another piece of like, okay, so this didn't work, but like Kubernetes has attracted any absurd amount of contribution and coordination and cooperation
Yeah.
from like the greater world at large. So like, how do we square this circle? How do we say like, okay, so why does Kubernetes work? Why are people volunteering for that? Why aren't people volunteering for this other thing? And also, why isn't the CNCF just picking up the pieces here and
Yeah.
saying, okay, we'll take care of this?
So on the question of the CNCF, I think a lot of companies mistakenly believe that when they join an open source foundation, the membership dues that they pay to the CNCF or the LF or the OpenSSF or whoever, goes towards buying maintainers,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. That's not what that money is used for. One of the things that money is used for is for paying for like our infrastructure. Like the Kubernetes project requires infrastructure of its own, right? Like we also get resources in the form of like token donations from like Microsoft or Google or whatever for like AWS or GCP resources. Fastly, DigitalOcean, all of them donate by giving us like free credits. but like the money you're paying the CNCF is not there as an emergency fund if a
Yeah.
project needs resources in the form of engineering. Sometimes, like it gets us access to things like we have access to the CNCF's PR engine. When the Kubernetes project needs to like blast something out really wide, we can use the CNCF's PR team for that. It gives like smaller projects that are like incubating in sandbox resources and structure and guidance on like legal issues, marketing issues, technical writing issues, that kind of stuff. That is what your money is paying for. It is not paying for the CNCF to come in from on high with hired salaried engineers to save a project that cannot save itself. Whether or not that's moral and correct is an entirely different argument, but the reality is that that is not what your dues are paying for. So
Well,
we
I want to
had
clarify
another,
as well. There are
yeah,
like a literal infinite number of projects that you could
yes,
justify
it's a ton.
spending huge buckets of money on. So
Yep.
that's like, it's very difficult to even draw that line if you wanted to.
Yeah. And sometimes like money is not what we need. There was another CNCF project called External Secrets Operator. Still exists. Like it hasn't gone away. It still exists. People use it. It's a sandbox project still, I think, but has applied for incubating status. And they pretty famously last year posted on Reddit threatening, like their own words were blackmailing our users because they weren't getting maintainers. And that wasn't what they needed. They did not need money. They needed bodies. So a thing that you have to also be doing as a company who wants to give back to open source, whether it's for the brownie points or for the security consideration, is commit bodies to it. Like you don't need to hire a whole engineering team that's like dedicated to contributing to upstream Kubernetes or whatever, but there needs to be some amount of like actual engineering work because usually what we're lacking is maintainers, reviewers, approvers, not just contributors. Contributors are always a thing that we need, even the Kubernetes project, but we need people that are around long term and then can eventually be trusted with elevated permissions to help review and approve PRs. So that's the CNCF money versus people angle. With the why didn't Ingress NGINX get maintainers and like why do other projects struggle with this? But Kubernetes is the second largest open source project in the world by contributors. It's not flashy, and I hate this. I really, 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 truly hate this.
Yeah.
Um, it's because it's not flashy. Ingress NGINX is a critical component for a lot of clusters, but it isn't flashy to say that you employ a maintainer of Ingress NGINX. It is flashy to say that you employ a Kubernetes maintainer.
Yeah.
Um, I see a lot of this because I am, in addition to being on the steering committee, I own the Kubernetes Release Team subproject. And the Kubernetes Release Team is, I'm not going to say it's the easiest way to get involved in Kubernetes and become an org member, but it is a way that requires like the least amount of upfront effort. It just requires a lot of luck because we have an open application for it 3 times a year. And it requires a team of about 20 people to cut a Kubernetes release over the course of
Wow.
the cycle. Yeah, it's very structured. But we have an open application process, and so we get like 200 or 300 applications
Yeah.
every time. Yeah, for like 20 positions. And we have to be acutely aware of the fact that a lot of those people applying are doing it because it looks good on their resume. They're not going to stick around. And we want the release team to be like an on ramp to contributing elsewhere in Kubernetes.
Sure.
The majority of people who go in through the release team are not going to do that. They want to be a Kubernetes org member because it looks good on their GitHub profile, and they want to be able to put Kubernetes version 1.36 release signal shadow on their LinkedIn. So we have to be aware of that, and like I don't know how to fix that problem aside from scaring people. Like Ingress NGINX died because we couldn't get people to contribute it to it, and people wouldn't contribute to it because it's not as flashy as Kubernetes, and that sucks. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I mean, look, this is one of those difficult problems. I think we see this in open source all the time where there are
Yep.
components of open source, we even like one of my favorites is like vulnerability IDs, right? Like CVEs. That's a world
Hmm.
I'm unfortunately just become just a part of my life. And like it is like infrastructure, right? It's like building a
Yep.
road in the middle of Nebraska, right? No one's going to be like, "Oh, let's go build a road in Nebraska. Sign me up." Like, let's write a press release. Like, no, it's boring, but it needs to be done and someone needs to pay for it.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
unfortunately, we don't know how to pay for that yet. In fact, a couple episodes before this, I've got Vlad from Open Source Pledge I talked to. And like, this is one of the topics is like, how do we get some of these companies to actually pay for some of this stuff, especially for the things that aren't necessarily understood? Because as you're well aware, I mean, you work for Minimus, so you've got like, turtles on top of turtles in terms of dependencies.
Oh yeah.
And like,
Hmm.
there are many organizations that are running stuff they don't even know is in there, right? Because
Oh,
they,
that's how the Equifax breach happened.
yes,
They didn't know they were still running struts too,
they were running
or at least
all
not
the
the vulnerable version of
strutses.
it. Yeah, they had no idea, and that's terrifying. Like I said this, I did a talk about like open source maintainers beefing with each other and how bad that is for the ecosystem a couple years ago. And afterwards, I gave a an interview with Jeremy Rickard to the Register, and we came down on like the only way any of this changes is if something really big falls over because people don't
Yeah.
believe that this is a problem. I had hoped that Ingress NGINX falling over would be the thing, but we had, and when I say we, I mean the steering committee and the security response committee, we had so much trouble getting people to listen. Even using the CNCF's PR engine to like push out requests to the media, we got far fewer requests than we expected. We couldn't get people to write articles about it, even though we released what we considered to be a pretty inflammatory statement about it, which is rare. I don't think the steering committee and the SRC have ever released a statement together, and we released a scary one, and people would not listen. So I think, unfortunately, it's going to take somebody getting pwned catastrophically because they stayed on Ingress NGINX for anybody to listen to this as like a real issue. And I don't want that. I don't want that for the company. I don't want that for whatever junior employee is forced to take the fall in public. I don't want that for the users of those products, but holy fuck, man. Like, what else are we supposed to do? Like,
I
we
wonder
begged.
I wonder if you're even correct. Because I look at things like, remember how log for shell was going to change everything and almost nothing
Oh,
changed.
yeah.
And then XZ
Nothing
was going to
changed.
change everything and then almost nothing changed. And
Mm,
like when I remember seeing the announcement from your folks about Ingress
yep.
NGINX, and I'm like, I want to say this is going to work, but I don't think it is. And I was
It,
unfortunately correct.
you were right. It did not. It didn't really do much of anything. And uh, how bad does it have to be? Like, how expensive does the risk have to be for a company to decide, okay, yeah, maybe it's worth having engineering spend like a few hours a month contributing upstream to this? Like, surely that's cheaper than like the financial and reputational hit of a massive widespread breach, especially through something like Ingress NGINX. It's a fucking Ingress controller. Like the amount of access it can grant to the rest of your environment
Yep.
is
All
terrifying.
of it.
All of it, the whole thing. It just doesn't seem like something to play around with to me, but people who are paid far more than I am have decided that it is worth the gamble.
So
Ugh.
okay. So I don't want to, I know we could spend like hours
We could
just
rabbit hole on it,
punching
yeah.
down on this and I get it. And it is bad.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so let's turn it into maybe a conversation about, kind of what we can do. So here's what I wonder sometimes about these sort of
Mhm.
conversations and these sort of problems is I think the security industry to date has done a very bad job of ever communicating a lot of this information in a coherent, insane manner. Because
Yeah,
historically it's been, you'll be sorry, and like they never were, so who cares, right?
yeah.
And I'm curious if you have thoughts on how we. I mean, I know you did communicate this, obviously,
Mhm.
in a way that was less successful than we had hoped. But I'm curious your thoughts on this. Like, what can we do different we aren't doing today, maybe?
So I can come at this with two different pieces of experience. I have not always worked in security. Working in security is actually relatively new to me.
Yeah.
Historically, I've just worked in DevOps, and that involves like having an awareness of security concerns and security tooling, but we don't communicate with people the same way security teams do. Um, I also was the person responsible for handling the massive PR and comms fallout of Kubernetes' Docker shim deprecation. So I have personal
Ah.
experience with not communicating things very well, and personal experience dealing with security teams as an outsider. And um, there's not really a way to say this that like doesn't sound mean. So I like so apologize
Bring
to
it.
the security professionals listening to this, but the way a lot of security teams communicate with people, whether it's like their own internal teams or whether it's communications externally, is wildly condescending.
Yes.
It's you talk down to people.
Yes.
You make people feel stupid for not having like an intimate knowledge of the security implications of whatever the fuck. And that is not how you get people to move or act. That is how you get people to dig their heels in
Yes.
because you've insulted them. And I think usually you don't realize it when you do this, right? Like I used to talk down to people in a way, and I definitely had to like learn how to communicate better. I took a PR class, honestly, like full disclosure, I paid somebody to teach me how to not sound like an asshole,
Nice.
um, which I recommend doing if you're in a leadership position. You 1000% need to do that. But yeah, you got to watch the condescension because it makes people not want to work with you. Um, but also you have to be really careful to understand how much your audience knows about what you're talking about. You overestimating how much they know is just as dangerous as underestimating how much they know. If you either way can look condescending depending on the way you're speaking to them. And either way is also not really going to succeed in getting people to understand like the weight of what you're trying to communicate to them. In the case of the Kubernetes Docker shim deprecation, we massively overestimated how much the average person understood about the relationship between Kubernetes and Docker. And it turned into a shit show that resulted in like major media outlets like The Guardian wanting to talk to us, which was terrifying,
Nice.
right? This was years ago, but like that we we screwed up. So we over rotated on communication. We now communicate maybe more than we actually have to, but we try to speak different languages when we're speaking to different people. So the statement we put out about Ingress NGINX from steering in the SRC was intentionally written in a way that it should be understandable to anyone working in the Kubernetes ecosystem, regardless of how much experience they have. It was very explicit about like this is why it's dangerous and this is how. But for people who are more technical than that and need more detail than that to like really truly understand how concerned they need to be, we had secondary and tertiary articles that went into significantly more technical detail. So you can't just use this like one fits all approach when trying to communicate about something. It's really important that you target for your audience the way you speak to them
Yeah.
and be real careful to not sound like a dick. And like security, y'all gotta work on that one. Like
Yes. I agree.
you are cooler than everybody else for sure,
No,
but you don't have to be an
no,
asshole
not
to.
cooler. Definitely not. Like, for sure not. I mean, I could speak for hours on how terrible I used to be. I mean, I tell people
Mhm.
I talk to, like, I will spend the rest of my life atoning for my sins of the past, of just being a
Oh yeah.
terrible, horrible person to everyone all the time. And I mean, I remember talking to other security people when I worked at Red Hat, thinking we were smarter than the kernel developers working on the kernel. And in
Oh
hindsight,
yeah.
I'm like, why would we even think that? Like, what on earth was wrong with us? But
There's something about security just like leads people to feel like a sense
yeah,
of intellectual
yeah, we
superiority, and I
thought
don't
we were
really get
awesome.
why.
It was terrible. I mean, in hindsight, it was like the most toxic, horrible like environment, and we fed off each other. But okay, so everything you just said, I think makes perfect sense. And there's the difficulty of kind of the unexcitingness of a lot of this open source, but it's also kind of critical. And so, building on top of everything you were just talking about, having, different ways to talk about things. So I think kind of the next piece of this then becomes, so it's going to be up to some of the technical leaders to understand what are the pieces of our infrastructure that we'll say are critical. And like, obviously,
Yeah.
NGINX, Ingress NGINX was 100% a critical piece of infrastructure for no doubt a ton of people.
Yep.
And so now the challenge becomes we have to be able to take, say like this could be a problem. And we all see this, right? Where there are dependencies in our infrastructure that might have unfixed CVEs where we then go to GitHub. And for 2 years, people have been begging the developer to fix the CVE. And now we have to
Yep.
convey to leadership, like why it's important we get involved here. But we can't say, go read this GitHub issue because
No.
our leadership's going to be like, what the hell am I looking at? Like, I don't know what any of
Yeah,
this
no, they don't get
means,
it.
you know?
No. I think that's why it's important to have people in technical leadership that can bridge the gap, like that
Yeah.
can speak engineering, but can also speak executive, because they are thinking about things from like two extremely different angles. An executive, you have to present like the security risks, the risks to your reputation, the ROI risks, like of not doing this. They have very different concerns than like you or I would. And that can be a difficult thing to juggle, right? Because a lot of engineers do not want to speak executive or learn to speak
Yeah.
executive.
Well,
It's like
well, look,
exhausting.
there's only two messages. How will this make us more money or how will this save us
Yeah,
money? That's it.
yeah,
Like one of those
that's
two
it.
things, hopefully both.
Yeah, you gotta understand that. You gotta like be okay accepting that like engineers are beholden to the whims of sales numbers too, right? Like you're not better than your CRO because you don't care about sales numbers, right? Um,
Well, you don't care till you get laid off, right?
yeah, and then boy, you care. You care. I got laid off last year. It
Yeah,
sucked. Can't recommend that experience at all. But yeah, it's partially another communication issue, for sure. Like somebody has to be aware of what your dependencies are. Somebody has to be able to argue like, hey, contributing back to these dependencies saves us money in the long run. Like the engineering hours are cheaper than the potential downfall of this thing falling over. And yelling at maintainers on an issue because
oh,
there's
I
a CVE
know.
you want them to fix, that ain't the way, baby, because it's open source. PRs are welcome. You want it fixed? Fix it. Like we are not under like a legal or moral obligation to fix anything,
That's
to
right.
respond to any issue, to even shut down a project gracefully. We didn't have to do that. We could have just turned it off. There was actually a discussion at KubeCon Atlanta about an emergency shutdown at KubeCon Atlanta. The decision to extend it for 6 months until
Wow.
KubeCon Amsterdam happened frantically over the course of about 12 hours at the Maintainer Summit. We were going to shut it down the next day. So and we would have been well within our rights to do that. So
Yes.
another thing for leadership to keep in mind is that we don't actually owe you anything. You're not our employers. You're not signing our paychecks. We're doing this as a favor for you, actually.
Yep.
So some help would be nice.
Yeah. I mean, open source owes you nothing. That's
Not a thing. Yeah,
that's the lesson. And additionally, like, so I mean, this is one of the challenges. There, maintainers often have this like very altruistic view of the world, right? And they feel
yeah, they
bad. They
do
feel like they're letting people down. And so they will
for
like
sure.
ruin their weekends and skip, important events to
Yep.
help other people sometimes, which I understand the altruism of that, but also like, don't do that.
I, I wish we did it less. I think it's dangerous. It's a burnout factory. We already have like a
Yeah.
massive problem with maintainer burnout. And doing stuff like that just makes it worse. In the Kubernetes Release Team subproject, we have a written down and well-established policy of we will delay this release before we overwork this team. If
Nice.
getting the release out on the target date requires us making the release team work after hours or work on weekends, even once, I'll delay the release. I don't care. AWS, GCP, Azure, Linode, whoever else, they can all wait. Like you wait at our pleasure. I'm not going to burn out my team
Yeah.
to get it to you a week early. Like our release dates are aspirational always. Um, and I wish that was more common in open source. It's not even like really common throughout the Kubernetes project. It's just that we rule SIG release with an iron fist, and the iron fist is employed making sure that our members don't burn out. But we don't control what other SIGs do. So
Yeah. Or,
they
well, and even
they
beyond
work.
SIGs, right? Like there's just lots of open source projects that are literally one
Yeah.
person. I mean,
Yeah, and that's terrifying, by the way. Like if you're relying on something that's maintained by one person, you need to either be using something else because that's not a healthy project, or you need to be devoting full-time engineers to that project, like stat,
so I
because
have some
that's
bad news for
hugely
you.
dangerous.
I have a lot
Let's
of
hear it.
data on this, and
Okay.
the number of single maintainer projects is an alarming graph. And it is, no matter how you slice and dice the numbers, because I have a graph where I'll show like all of the single project maintainers
Yeah.
for, it doesn't matter what ecosystem you pick, the graphs always look the same, where the single project is like literally 80%, and then it's, kind of a Pareto curve down. And then people say, oh, that's all of the projects. If you look at only the popular ones, it's different. And then you look at the popular ones and the graph looks exactly the same, exact same shape. It's just obviously smaller numbers.
Oh,
Then you're like, oh, that's just NPM. Python's totally different. Nope, literally.
oh no,
I have
Python's
I
not.
have
Yeah.
tried to find a way to not see the same graph, and it's always the same. So
See, and
if you are using
that
open
sucks.
source, I 100% guarantee you have
Yeah.
an enormous number of single maintainer projects holding up your scaffolding.
That is awful too, because like it's that fucking XKCD comic
Except
again,
it's one strip
y-
that's 2 miles
of just
high.
like a tower of one by ones. Yeah, and that's not good.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable.
Yeah.
That one person is crispy. I guarantee
Oh,
it.
yes.
They're so crispy, and that's a time bomb.
Yes. Yes.
You know, like
Well,
we got
and
we got to do better.
and what makes it even worse now is, so I know a lot of people who maintain like single person things because
Yeah.
that's what they do. And thanks to XZ and Giatan,
Mm.
now they're skeptical of every PR they get of their project. And they're like, can I trust this person? What's going on? I've had people contact me more than once. They're like, can you look at this PR? Does this look weird? And more than once I've been like, actually, this does look a little weird. Like, I don't think I'd take this, you know?
Yeah, that's scary. Like that makes the problem so much worse over time.
Yeah.
Like a lot of open source is like it's a trust-based thing. We're a community, right? Like most of us within an ecosystem are real life friends who go get beers together and do
Yes.
not talk about computers. And violating that trust feels like it feels so gross.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
somebody wants to help, I want to be able to trust that. It's a trust but verify, right? But to immediately go have to look at every single PR under the guise of like, is this a state-sponsored attacker
I know,
trying
right?
to worm their way into my good graces so that they get admin rights over the repo so that they can push a poisoned release that nobody will catch for nine
Yeah.
months?
Yeah.
That sucks.
I mean, you tell me with the release SIG, like how often have you looked
hmm
at the application and been like, this has got to be a North Korean?
I've never looked at one and been like, this has got to be a North Korean because we don't give elevated rights to new members of the release team.
Ah,
They get
okay.
org membership and like they get the access. It depends on which sub team they're on, but they might get the ability to like add milestone labels to something or
Okay.
be able to LGTM a PR, but they don't get any kind of administrative rights. Even like the release lead has some elevated rights for a pretty brief period of time for the duration of a cycle, so like 15 weeks. But by the time somebody is the release lead, we've worked with them for a year and a half, 2 years, like on Zoom calls, seen
Sure.
their face, seen their work, that kind of thing. So very rarely is it, I think this person might be a nation state actor. Um, but we do get some really stupid applications. There's like a trap question in there that is, have you read the handbook for your role? The answer is yes. Okay, put yes. Even if you haven't,
Obviously, yeah.
please lie to me, right? Like, if you select no, you immediately get rejected. And
Yeah.
people still do it. We get like 2 or 3 per cycle of people that say no. Just lie to me, dude. Lie.
Right.
I have no way to check. You know?
Well, you just
But
ruined your secret now.
I I've said that on like 4 or 5 different
Oh,
podcasts, and I keep getting people just saying no.
excellent.
I
I
don't know.
whatever. I guess it's good.
Whatever.
It filtered them out, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it worked. It worked. But no, we don't. I'm gonna think about that more closely. I'll open the application again in like 2.5 weeks, and I'm gonna think about that real closely. But I don't think I will find any that look like this is a North Korean.
do you work for a nation state? Like,
Mm.
yes, no.
You know what? Yeah, I'll just add that to the application questionnaire. Why not?
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. Do you work for the government of North Korea?
Awesome. Then wait till you get yeses.
Oh my God. I mean, one of my asshole friends will fill it out and
Yeah,
put yes just to fuck
it's
with me
true.
for
There you
sure.
go. There you go. Okay. Okay. So I want to start landing this plane, Cat. And so
Okay.
I feel like this has been really doom and gloom. And I
Yeah.
think it's just kind of the nature of the beast at the moment. I do think there are some difficulties that we don't necessarily know how to solve yet. And there are people doing a lot of work on this, right? Like CNCF does a lot of work.
Hmm.
There's like the Sovereign Tech Agency out of Germany.
Yep.
There's like the Alpha Omega project and the Linux Fund and the OpenSSF. I don't know exactly how they're connected. I just talked to Mike a
The
little while ago.
OpenSSF and the CNCF are both directed funds of the Linux Foundation.
Right. But Alpha Omega is also
Eh.
weird because it's sort of connected
Yeah,
to the
they're
OpenSSF and sort of connected to the Linux Foundation. And I don't know exactly how to draw that line, but whatever. Doesn't
yeah.
matter. There's a ton of people kind of doing some work. There's like the open source pledge. I just talked to Vlad a little while ago. So,
Yeah.
so I guess those feel big and probably out of the grasp of us normal folks, where I guess I shouldn't say that. You can go get involved, but I'm like, let's talk to someone working at a company that's not like overflowing with resources, but they are using open source. Like what are
Mhm.
the things you think they should what are the things we can start doing that will have like a real impact on kind of our universe right now?
So you don't need your employer's permission to contribute to open
That's
source
true.
usually. Some companies will like really lock you down, but you don't, especially not in your free time on your own machine. So if you want to do this for the love of the game and not because you're being paid to do it, you can just go do that. You do not need your boss's permission to do it. And if you are scared to contribute to open source for the first time, that's totally understandable. I was
Yeah,
too. Just about everybody I know was. You are opening a PR and explicitly asking to be judged by a bunch of weird nerds
yes,
who are like top down experts in this like very niche thing that you are just now trying to enter. You don't understand the cultural expectations, the community expectations. You don't understand the style guide. You don't understand how to talk to these people, and they're all strangers. That is, in fact, scary. However, we are all, well, not all of us, most of us are really nice. And
that's true.
you can ask for help. I say most of us because every project has a couple people who are just like kind of mean, but
Yeah,
you keep
yeah.
them around, and it's not great. And I wish we didn't, but we do. But generally, we're nice and we're helpful, and we want you here. We want this one PR from you, but we would also like more if you have a minya. Usually, open source projects will have some kind of like Slack workspace or a Discord or a Discuss or a forum or God help us, some of them IRC, and you can just show up there and ask to be pointed in a direction. For the Kubernetes project, I am more than happy to point you in a direction if you just message me on Slack. I do it all the time. it is part of my job, and I would love to do that for you. Um, if you would like to convince your boss to allow you to do this on company time, you probably need your manager's support on this one because you need somebody with the necessary rapport with like upper level leadership to make that, hey, this will save us money or this will
Yeah.
make us money argument for you. But that is a conversation that is worth having. On a much less doom and gloom note, also, I don't think that this is permanent. And I don't think that like this whole situation with maintainer burnout and projects falling over is just an inevitable result of the way open source is. I think that this is a growing pain situation.
Yes.
For a long, 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 long time, the norm for software was closed source, proprietary, and open source stuff was for weird FOSS hippies,
Yes.
right? It would like, and my dad is a retired software engineer, and he did not believe that open source software was safe or stable or profitable or a thing that would last until the Red Hat sale.
Ah,
And then he believed it. And my dad is 72 for context for listeners, and has been an engineer for his entire adult life. So like this whole open source being the norm, open source being a good business decision, open source components being a part of 70 to 90% of all software built, that's new.
yeah.
That is
Yeah.
is absolutely in like the total history of computer science, it's new and we are still figuring it out. So I don't think that this is forever. This is growing pains. We have suddenly overtaken the world and nobody really knows how to respond to it because we're still being run by a bunch of enterprises who have leadership who think the way that my dad did,
Yeah.
and they haven't really figured out how to work with us yet. So I think this will get better. We do have to tough it out, but it will change eventually because we are the norm now and we were not before.
I agree with everything you just said. That is my suspicion as well. And I don't have any numbers on this, but I would bet you if you went to senior leadership in nearly every software company and asked them what percentage of their code is open source, they'd probably tell you like 10%. That is my suspicion because
Yes, Gartner. So I talked to somebody from Gartner, I think, that did a study on this, and it was um, something like 13% of software is open source, and they expect it to be like 23% within the next few years. But total pieces of software containing any open source component, according to the Linux Foundation, is anywhere between 70 and 90%.
yeah. Oh, that's funny. So Gartner's saying 13% and the Linux Foundation is saying 90. Obviously, they both have their own angles here, but
Yeah,
there's no
they
way it's
both have their own
13.
angles here. So there's no way it's
No.
13. There's not a chance. But it's truth is somewhere in the middle there, I suspect. And the open source will probably rise as we move off of like legacy applications that have been like lifted and shifted into containers. But
They never
you know,
die and they never will.
oh no, and my dad is gonna periodically remind me that I could be making so much more money if I just would learn Pascal.
Or
So,
COBOL, like either
or
or,
COBOL.
you know?
Yeah,
No, I
yeah.
know. Oh man. Yep, I get it. I totally get it. But all right, Kat, this has
Yeah.
been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the time. This is great. And
Oh,
you've
thank you.
restored some of my hope. So I always appreciate that.
Good, I'm glad.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.